Welcome to the Traditional Catholic Daily Devotional for Wednesday, July 8, 2026. It's the Feast of St. Elizabeth of Portugal, third class with the color of white. In this episode, the meditation, The Miracles of Lanciano. Today's news from the Church, the good and the bad schismatics. And today's thought from Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. But first, the collect of today's Mass. Most merciful God, who among other admirable gifts endowed Blessed Queen Elizabeth with the special grace of calming the tumult of war, grant by her intercession that after the peace for which we humbly pray, we may attain everlasting happiness. So I made a mistake. If you have been listening to the devotional over the past week or so, we already did St. Elizabeth of Portugal. I don't know what happened. I must have looked at the wrong date or pulled up the wrong thing or something. In any case, we just talked about St. Elizabeth of Portugal last week, so while she's a great saint and everything, we don't need to talk about her biography twice. Let's talk instead about St. Kilian, who's also commemorated on this day. He's an Irish missionary who left behind the comfort of his homeland to preach the gospel in a land that barely knew Christ. He's remembered today as the Apostle of Franconia, but his story begins on the windswept shores of Ireland, where generations of monks had already developed a reputation for carrying the faith across Europe. Born in the 7th century, Kilian was educated as a monk and eventually ordained a bishop. Like many Irish missionaries of his time, he felt called to leave everything behind and become what the Irish called a pilgrim for Christ. It meant setting out without knowing where the journey would end, trusting that God would lead the way. Kilian eventually arrived in what is now southern Germany, accompanied by two companions, Saints Coleman and Tottenan. They made their way to Würzburg, a region where Christianity had gained only a small foothold and many people still followed pagan customs. Before beginning their work, Kilian traveled to Rome to seek the blessing of the Pope, and that detail says a lot. He wanted his work to remain firmly united to the Church. Back in Franconia, the mission flourished. Kilian preached, baptized converts, and gradually won the respect of Duke Gosbert. The Duke himself embraced Christianity and began trying to live according to the teachings of the gospel. That's where things became complicated. Kilian eventually told the Duke that one part of his personal life needed to change. His marriage violated Christian law because he had married his deceased brother's widow. It was a difficult conversation, but Kilian believed that preaching the gospel meant proclaiming the whole truth, even when it's sometimes uncomfortable for the people in power. The Duke was willing to make the change. His wife was not. According to tradition, while the Duke was away on campaign, she ordered the murder of Kilian and his two companions. They were quietly killed and buried in secret around the year 689. Their story might have ended there, kind of with a whimper, but it didn't. Years later, their graves were rediscovered, and devotion to the three missionaries spread rapidly throughout the region. Würzburg became one of the great centers of Christianity in Germany, and to this day, the city's magnificent Würzburg Cathedral is dedicated to St. Kilian. His relics remain there, and every July the city celebrates the Kiliani Festival, one of Bavaria's oldest and largest religious festivals, drawing pilgrims and visitors from across Germany. Kilian's life reminds us that charity and truth always belong together. He preached the gospel with kindness, but he never softened the message of Christ when it became difficult. St. Kilian, courageous missionary and martyr of Franconia, pray for us. Today's meditation, The Miracles of Lanciano. Two Eucharistic miracles took place in Lanciano, Italy. The first took place in the 8th century in the Church of St. Lagoncian, now the Church of St. Francis. A monk of the Order of St. Basil assigned to that church was tormented by doubts concerning the real presence. One day, at the moment of consecration as he was celebrating Mass, the host transformed into human flesh and the wine into fresh blood. The host remains today as though mummified and has been preciously conserved along with the blood, which eventually coagulated. Both are exposed for adoration each year on Easter Day. A scientific analysis in 1971 revealed that the host is indeed human flesh from the myocardium, that is, from the heart, and from the heart of one who is alive. The coagulated blood is of the AB blood type, also with the properties of blood from a living person. Still to this day, we can venerate this miraculous host and the 5 discs of coagulated blood. Another miracle occurred not far from Lanciano in the 13th century. A woman was married to a brutal man, and so she went to a sorceress to obtain peace in her marriage. The sorceress asked her to procure a consecrated host, so that she could mix a potion for changing hardened hearts. The unfortunate wife accepted, and after receiving communion, set the host aside in her veil and brought it to the sorceress, who placed it on the fire in order to turn it into ashes. Immediately, the host transformed into living flesh, and blood began to flow in such abundance that it put out the flames. Panicking, the two women wrapped the whole gridiron with the host still on it in a piece of cloth and buried it at the corner of a stable of the Catholic woman. 7 years later, the woman confessed her sin to the prior of the place. The priest asked her to bring him to the place in order to find the profaned host. He then discovered the gridiron in the ground, wrapped in a cloth, drenched in fresh blood, with a host still intact. One part of the host looks like bleeding flesh, and the other has kept the appearance of bread. The prior took the host and brought it to his convent. He then ordered acts of reparation for this abominable sacrilege. This is taken and adapted from the book From Trinity Sunday to the Assumption. It's available at Angelus Press, and there's a link in the show notes. Today's news from the Church: the good and the bad schismatics. Today's article argues that Rome's treatment of the Society of St. Pius X is inconsistent when compared with its approach to groups that are universally recognized as being in schism. Rather than defending the SSPX's position directly, Father Frederick Vail seeks to demonstrate what he sees as contradictions in the contemporary Vatican policy by comparing the Society's situation with Rome's relations with the Orthodox, the Chinese state-controlled church, Anglicans, and other groups. The core of the article is a lengthy series of comparisons intended to expose what the author considers a double standard. He points to the Vatican's dialogue with Orthodox churches, its recognition of bishops appointed under agreements with Communist China, its reception of Anglican leaders, and its willingness to tolerate bishops associated with the German synodal path. By contrast, he argues that Rome continues to threaten the SSPX with canonical penalties, despite the Society's repeated profession of fidelity to the papacy, and its rejection of any intention to create a parallel church. The article presents these examples as evidence that Rome applies greater severity towards traditional Catholics than towards groups or individuals whose positions diverge more substantially from Catholic doctrine. The reflection also revisits long-standing debates over confession, marriage, episcopal jurisdiction, and Vatican II, arguing that the requirements imposed on the SSPX are more demanding than those applied in ecumenical relations with separated churches. Throughout, the article contends that the contrasting approaches reveal a deeper shift in the Church's priorities since the Council. The article concludes that this apparent inconsistency is not accidental, but reflects a broader ecclesiological orientation. From the author's perspective, Rome's openness towards those outside the Church has been accompanied by increasing suspicion towards those most firmly attached to Catholic tradition, leading him to argue that the severity shown towards the SSPX ultimately reinforces rather than weakens its claim to preserve the Church's traditional faith. To read this full article, please see the link in our show notes. Finally, today's thought from Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre: I will never compromise. I will accept that which comes from proper authority, which is in keeping with the truths, doctrines, and the traditions of Holy Mother Church, and I will reject what does not conform to that criteria. This is taken and adapted from The Spiritual Life, published by Angelus Press. There's a link in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Until tomorrow, may God bless you.